Across the most advanced, populous, and civilized region on Earth, empires fell, cities were destroyed, trade routes cut. This is the account of the rise and collapse of civilization and the First Great Dark Age. This is planet Earth. More than 8 billion people now live in civilizations spread across the globe. The Near East is the region at the crossroads of Africa, Europe, and Asia. Here, humans developed the first great civilizations. In the Copper Age, towns became cities, writing developed, agricultural productivity and population rapidly grew. Throughout the region, kings emerged to lead their people into conflict with their neighbors, to accumulate greater wealth, territory, and power. In the Bronze Age, kings of city-states expanded their control and formed the first great empires. In Egypt, city-states along the Nile coalesced into two kingdoms, and one conquered the other. Even though the kingdom had its ups and downs, it was relatively stable, largely due to its geographic isolation. This was not the case in the rest of the region. Throughout the Levant and Mesopotamia, kingdoms rose and fell on a regular basis. Powerful states and proto-empires rarely outlived a competent king. Sargon of Akkad is often considered to be the founder of history's first true empire. And like every empire in human history, Sargon's Akkadian Empire collapsed. Sargon's successors were all plagued by widespread internal revolt. Numerous coalitions of Sumerian city-states repeatedly rebelled. In the east, the Elamites successfully gained their independence. The Elamites, along with other mountain men, the Marhashi and the Gutians, invaded Mesopotamia. The Gutians were successful and installed themselves as a new ruling class in a few powerful city-states, and assimilated into the local culture. This success was short-lived and only lasted a few decades. The entire Near East reverted to the pre-Sargon era system of independent city-states. The situation was so fractured and confused that in the Sumerian kings list for this time, the sarcastic comment, "Who was king? Who was not king?" was written. This state of affairs ended when the venerable Sumerian city-state of Ur, which had been hardened by the tough times, conquered most of Mesopotamia. While these events unfolded in isolated Egypt, the country broke in half. After many centuries of prosperity and stability, two rival pharaohs set up shop in two new rival capital cities. For more than a century, Egypt was split into two roughly equal parts, with neither side gaining a significant advantage. The stalemate ended when the southern Theban dynasty conquered the north, reuniting Egypt, beginning another long, stable period of prosperity and peace in Egypt. The efficiently run Sumerian Empire also enjoyed a period of prosperity, development, massive building projects, but peace would not last long. Neo-Sumerian kings had two great challenges. 1. Prevent tribes from the wasteland, primarily Amorites, from settling in Mesopotamia. 2. Keep the mountain men in their mountains and off the flatland. The kings of Ur were largely successful in these two goals until Ur's last king, Ibbi-Sin. Ibbi-Sin's reign was plagued with poor harvests, where the price of grain increased 15 times, and rebellious vassals who refused to pay taxes. The final blow came from the Elamites, who captured not only Ibbi-Sin, but Ur itself. They occupied the city for 7 years, before being driven out by the locals. The fall of Ur broke open the floodgates to the Amorite tribes from the wasteland who poured into Mesopotamia. In the aftermath of the Neo-Sumerian collapse, smaller regional powers developed. Most of these became dominated by the Amorites. The Amorites, once the most lowly and despised of peoples in Mesopotamia, evolved into the warlords, protectors, and ruling class of the land. One of the most notable Amorite warlord kings was Shamshi-Adad. He conquered the city of Ashur and made it his base of operations for conquering a formidable empire. Shamshi-Adad was a humble man who declared himself king of the universe. and pacifier of the land between the two rivers. Shamshi-Adad was an extremely competent administrator, politician, and general. All of Mesopotamia was subjugated, allied, or living in quiet fear of him. His armies successfully campaigned as far as the coast of the Mediterranean. Most states there, allied, paid tribute, or did whatever they had to do to avoid a fight. Only one small kingdom stood in his way and refused to bend the knee: Yamhad. Yamhad had previously only been notable as a religious center and pilgrimage site in the region. It was considered a holy city, housing the temple of the storm god, Teshub. Yamhad had a cosmopolitan population of many ethnic groups, and they had a brand new Amorite dynasty leading it, and the Amorites are always down for a fight, am I right? Shamshi-Adad was a calculating and patient warrior. He made alliances with the states to the north and south of Yamhad, surrounding it with hostile enemies. However, the children of the storm god and their new Amorite king were fearless and unshaken. They went to battle against Shamshi-Adad and got their capital besieged and their king killed, but they survived. The slain king's son was a capable ruler and diplomat. Previously, only a nomadic tribe from the wasteland and some mountain men far to the east were the only ones crazy enough to ally with Yamhad. However, after they kept on surviving, they began to take more territory and formed two new powerful alliances. The first was Eshnunna, previously an ally, enemy, and then vassal of Shamshi-Adad. Eshnunna rebelled and allied with Yamhad. Together, they simultaneously attacked the northern Mesopotamian Empire. After Shamshi-Adad's death, the empire lost most of its territory. The king of Yamhad installed his son-in-law as king of Mari, a strategically important and immensely wealthy city-state, which had previously had one of Shamshi-Adad's sons as their king. After Shamshi-Adad's death, Yamhad also made peace with the Amorite kingdom of Katna, which had been a long-time bitter enemy of Yamhad. Yaram-Lim became the most powerful king in the region. As a great king, he attained the status equal to the Pharaoh of Egypt. More than 20 vassal kings called him father, paid him homage, and came to him for their disputes. His power and wealth were such that he could afford to dispatch 500 ships into Mesopotamia and station them there for 12 years, and send armies to campaign as far as the borders of Elam to further his foreign policy goals. Yamhad's ally, Eshnunna, grew jealous and waged war against Mari and captured the jewel of the empire. Eshnunna's plans were short-sighted, and their hostile actions angered just about everybody in the region. Only 3 years later, Mari rebelled against them and was joined by the armies of Babylon, Larsa, and Elam, and they sacked Eshnunna. In 1764 BC, Hammurabi became king. Not the Hammurabi you're thinking of. Yaram-Lin's son, also named Hammurabi, sent Yamhad's troops to aid the other Hammurabi in conquering southern Mesopotamia. Hammurabi was a patient king who bided his time well. Previously, Babylon had been a staunch, isolationist power, and even nominal vassal of Shamshi-Adad. After consolidating the south, Hammurabi conquered Eshnunna. And then, just like Eshnunna, Hammurabi couldn't resist attacking Mari. 1 year later, Hammurabi conquered Mari, and for unknown reasons, he later razed the famous city to the ground. Perhaps it was done to avoid war with Yamhad. If there was no great prosperous city in between the two great powers, there would be no cause to fight over it. If that was the plan, it worked. Despite the destruction of Yamhad's valuable vassal, the two Hammurabis maintained amicable relations with each other for the rest of their reigns, which coincidentally ended the same year. Both Hammurabis left large, stable states that were at peace. But the legacy of Hammurabi of Babylon would be enduring. Famous for his law code, which he left copies of all over the place, he also made Babylon the main political, economic, religious, and cultural center in Mesopotamia. The state he left behind was so stable for the next 155 years, all of his successors reigned for over 20 years each. Despite being one of the most peaceful periods in Mesopotamian history, all was not well in the region. Mari had been originally established as a military outpost to protect trade moving through northern Mesopotamia. Its destruction made the region significantly more dangerous for merchants. This negatively impacted all the economies in the region. In addition to this, making things worse, poor rainfall, drought, and famine became widespread throughout the region. Consequently, many settlements were abandoned in northern Mesopotamia. During this period, settlers from the surrounding mountains moved into the sparsely populated northern areas, and more or less peacefully integrated with the pre-existing local populations there. In southern Mesopotamia, cities were also abandoned, but not all. Many of those that stood behind consolidated in the extreme south. The Tigris and Euphrates River Delta has slowly silted up over time. This has slowly and consistently pushed the coastline to the south over many centuries. In the seaside marshes, separatists formed their own independent kingdom of Sealand. Little is known of this kingdom, but they did stick around for a long while. In the west, during the period of Amorite dominance in Mesopotamia, Egypt had enjoyed a prosperous era. In the 19th century BC, Pharaoh Senwosret III greatly expanded Egypt's influence and control to the south in Nubia and to the north in Canaan. In Canaan, Egyptian campaigns, road and fort building established control over trade routes there, and brought great wealth and prestige to Egypt. In the following centuries, Egypt's imperial sphere of influence brought numerous waves of migrants to Egypt. Canaanites formed the bulk of the newcomers. Collectively, they became known as the Hixos. Later in the 17th century BC, the Egyptian noble class became fractured by internal strife, leading to decades of instability. Taking advantage of this, the Hyksos established an independent kingdom in the Nile Delta. From there, they dealt the Egyptians a series of crushing defeats, consolidating their control over the north. There is some scholarly debate. To what degree was the Hyksos takeover of Egypt an internal uprising, a mostly amicable separation, an invasion, or some combination of these? In any case, the Hyksos adopted much of Egyptian culture and combined it with their own. Their king took the title pharaoh and worshipped Egyptian gods. Another culture that had some contact and some impact on the Hyksos was the Minoan civilization from the island of Crete. At the Hyksos pharaoh's palace in the capital city of Avaris, Minoan artists painted frescoes depicting bull leaping and maze patterns. The Minoans were master sailors and established what has been called a thalassocracy over the Aegean Sea region in the Mediterranean. Through coercion and/or force, they tightly controlled maritime trade in the Aegean, and were a dominant player in trade throughout the whole eastern Mediterranean Sea. On the island of Crete, the Minoans used their immense wealth to build gigantic palace complexes on the island. While the men were out at sea, women played a significant role in the political, religious, and economic life on the island. Around the late 17th century BC, this highly advanced and elaborate culture came crashing down in a series of natural disasters. A volcanic eruption on the island of Thera obliterated the Minoan colony there, which played a key role in their trade network. The aftershock of the blast caused a series of earthquakes and tsunamis that devastated Crete. The Minoan vassals and tributaries rebelled, and the Aegean fell into chaos. As the 17th century BC drew to a close, Egypt and Crete languished, as did Qatna and Ashur. After losing control of major trade routes and being defeated by Yamhad, Qatna's influence disintegrated. Ashur's decline was self-inflicted, as it was consumed with internal squabbling and faded into obscurity. Things didn't seem so bad for the Amorite states of Yamhad and Babylon, but times were about to get much worse. Far off in the mountains of Anatolia, a state that the great powers of the day and previous centuries devoted little thought to, was on the rise. The kingdom of Hatti. While Yamhad and Babylon were busy with peace, prosperity, and pastimes, the Hittite warriors of Hatti were busy cracking skulls, raiding, looting, and conquering their neighbors. The constant campaigning and conflict made the Hittites efficient and formidable in battle. When the long-haired warriors of the north, carrying and wearing heavy metal, descended upon the prosperous cities of the south, they found them completely unprepared. After sacking several cities and carrying off more wealth than the Hittites had ever dreamed about, they set their sights on Yamhad, which had failed to defend its vassals. The great city, whose famous fortress and temple had stood up to the famed king of the universe, Shamshi-Adad, fell to the Hittites. The tremendous amount of plunder taken from Yamhad did not satiate the Hittites' thirst for riches, glory, and newfound taste for luxury. While campaigning in the flat lands, the Hittites must have been awed by tales of an even greater, more populous, and wealthy city than Yamhad, Babylon. In 1595 BC, the Hittite king Mursili embarked on an unprecedented campaign. He marched his army more than 1,200 miles, or 2,000 kilometers, to the south, leaving a swath of destruction in their wake. Once mighty Babylon was also caught off guard and unprepared. The Hittites brutally sacked the city and carried off immense wealth and many captives back to Anatolia. Upon returning to the Hittites' capital city of Hattusa, Mursili must have expected to be greeted as a triumphant hero. But his brother-in-law had a different idea. He was the royal cupbearer, and instead of serving Mursili a drink, he served him a palace coup, and upgraded his cup to a crown. Mursili's death obviously left some bad feelings in the royal family. Consequently, the kingdom descended into a chaotic spiral of retaliations and reprisals that left the land of Hatti a devastated backwater. The 1500s BC had barely begun, and everything was awful, pretty much everywhere. As warlords, mountain tribes, and familial bands of semi-nomadic herdsmen roamed Mesopotamia, urban life was at its lowest level since before 3000 BC. Long-distance trade routes were cut, and economies crashed. For the cities that managed to rebuild or survive, life was tough, traumatizing, and a pale shadow of what had been only a few decades before. In cities like Yamhad, admirable attempts were made at rebuilding the city and getting the old empire going again, but this was a new age, a dark age. None of the old Amorite dynasties that had ruled over the major states in the Near East survived the collapse. New peoples came to dominate the rubble of the old world and began to rebuild. In northern Mesopotamia, Hurrian tribes that had long lived on the outskirts of the region and had first started moving into the flatlands centuries earlier, were joined by more of their kinsmen that came down from the mountains during the Dark Age. They began to form many small petty states and kingdoms there. In southern Mesopotamia, a similar dynamic played out with the Kassites. For centuries, Kassites had been slowly migrating into Mesopotamia, but in the Dark Age, they flooded in and came to dominate the region. Earlier, Kassites were commonly used as laborers, slaves, or mercenaries. In the Dark Age, they established themselves as a new ruling class and began the long process of rebuilding Babylon. While in most regions in the Near East, it took between 1 to 200 years or more to recover from the collapse, in Egypt, the recovery began sooner. During this period, the Egyptian kingdom had shrank into little more than a city-state, controlling just the city of Thebes and the surrounding countryside. While the Hixos conquered the north, Nubians conquered southern Egypt up to the border of Thebes. Over the course of many decades of conflict, the Egyptians slowly clawed back their territory, expelling the Nubians and the Hixos around 1550 BC. Resulting from the trauma of being controlled by two foreign powers, the Egyptians became extremely militant. After the reconquest, the Egyptians still didn't feel safe, and they kept going and conquered the southern Levant, establishing a large buffer zone. By the 15th century BC, the Kassites had fully assimilated and rebuilt the Babylonian Empire. To Babylon's east, Elam was not doing great. There are very little surviving records from Elam during the First Great Dark Age, but what we can reasonably ascertain from the surviving material record is that they had also been in a period of decline. Their trading partners to the west, as well as to the east, were all more than decimated. Far to the east, the Elamites had long traded, through intermediaries, with the Indus Valley civilization. which had been in severe decline for centuries, and then dissipated away, abandoning their cities. Despite all this, the Elamites' geographic isolation aided their survival. After some conflict with the Elamites, Kassite Babylon engaged in diplomatic relations and marriage alliances with Elam. When the resurgent Babylon and Egypt both expanded north, they came into contact with the Mitanni Empire. The empire was formed from a mosaic of Hurrian tribes, statelets, and petty kingdoms that united and formed a Hurrian empire. Exactly how, when, and why this happened is currently obscured by the Dark Age and lost in the sands of time, and is currently a subject of scholarly debate and speculation. The Mitanni Empire fought New Kingdom Egypt throughout the 15th century BC in numerous conflicts. After a century of fighting, they made peace, which was sealed with a diplomatic marriage alliance. The Mitanni Emperor even visited Egypt for the wedding, which must have been quite the spectacle, and maybe even the event of the century. In Mesopotamia, being the father-in-law of a great king was considered extremely prestigious. And in Egypt, having foreign wives was considered more prestigious, so everyone was happy. In the Aegean, the mainland independent network of Mycenaean Greek states had supplanted the Minoans as masters of the sea. The Mycenaeans vassalized and colonized the Aegean. They also became skilled merchants that traded all along the eastern Mediterranean coast. By this time, the Hittites had stopped stabbing themselves in the back and reformed their empire. They had learned many lessons the hard way and were more united, methodical, and organized than before. The Bronze Age Near East that had re-emerged from the Dark Age was very different from the Bronze Age world that had come before the collapse. This was not the first time an individual civilization collapsed, but it was the first time that we know of that a whole interconnected system of civilizations collapsed at the same time. During the Dark Age, several major changes occurred. 1. The ruling elite changed everywhere. The corrupt and inefficient ancient ruling families were swept aside, and new rulers, mostly descended from lowly mountain tribal warriors and chieftains, rose to power. 2. The interconnected system of trade and diplomacy that rose up after the collapse was far more sophisticated and efficient than that of the burgeoning system that had evolved in the Middle Bronze Age. 3. The thunder of chariots was everywhere. When detailed historical accounts resumed after the collapse, a major change that occurred was the development and ubiquitous dissemination of the spoke-wheeled chariot, which was far more technologically superior than any war cart or proto-chariot that had come before it. The final centuries of the Bronze Age saw human civilization reach new heights, before it all came crashing down again. In the 12th century BC, the Near East plunged into a greater Dark Age than perhaps any age before or since. If you would like to learn more about this most infamous collapse, please check out my numerous videos on that subject, that I'm sure you will find fascinating. And if you would like to help this channel from collapsing like the Bronze Age, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or if you are financially stable enough, $1 or $2 will be much appreciated in these tough times. This has been Epimetheus. Thank you so much for watching.